We grown-ups try to teach kids as much as possible as they grow up. Things like how to say your ABCs, ride a bike, and when to say please and thank you. And even bigger things like how to date, when to quit something, and how to forgive. But there are a handful of important topics we often never get around to talking about. Things that are simply too hard to just bring up. Racism is one of those topics. And yet, what age is too early for kids to learn about racism? When is too soon for kids to learn about how to treat those who look different? Who is supposed to help kids learn about racism? This is a book designed to help get the conversation started, to help grown-ups and kids alike wade into a really tough topic and hopefully spark the first of many conversations to come about racism. Enjoy.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
This is a book about systemic racism. And believe it or not, it's actually for kids. I have to say, this book was really hard to write. Systemic racism is incredibly difficult to understand, even for grown-ups. But to help make sense of it, I'm going to start with an example. I'm black. Did you know that it's really rare for someone with my skin color to write a kid's book? When I was a kid, I almost never read a book by a black author. That might seem normal or no big deal, but it shouldn't be normal. And it is a big deal. But that's how it works. Systemic racism seems normal. It's almost like it's invisible. Something that's always around, but you never quite see it, unless you look really hard. So my hope with this kid's book is to help you not only see it, but want to do something about it. You might already know what racism is. It's when someone is excluded, treated badly, or hated because of their race or skin color. Systemic racism is when racist ideas are built into laws, schools, stories, and other institutions in a way that collectively makes life much harder for people of color. Let me give you some more examples. When I was a kid, the only people on TV that looked like me were athletes, comedians, or rappers. When I was in school, I was suspended for things that my white friends often were not. When I was in class, I never had a teacher that looked like me until I went to college. When I was a teenager, I was stopped by the police multiple times, while many of my white friends weren't. Looking at these moments, it may not seem like it was about the color of my skin, but systemic racism isn't always obvious, which is what makes it so hard to see. Before I understood that, I used to get frustrated and angry, even at myself. But as I grew up, I noticed I wasn't the only one experiencing this. Other people of color were experiencing the same thing. That's when I started to notice a pattern. I learned that if you're black, you're most likely to be stopped by the police. It can be harder to get a job. It can be more difficult to buy a home. You're less likely to go to a good school. You're less likely to be in charge. And most heroes and stories don't look like you. As you read these things, you might feel sad or even angry. You also might start to wonder how it got this way. Well, the reason is long and complicated, but I'll do my best to explain. Since the start of our countries, many people with white skin whose families came from Europe were given land, opportunity, and access to money, while people of color, those with black and brown skin, and the indigenous people that lived on the land before white people arrived, were attacked, killed, and sold into slavery. Then, even after they fought for their freedom, people of color still didn't have as many rights. they still had more obstacles and experienced a lot of discrimination. New laws were even created to make life harder for them because many white people didn't want to share. Over time, the value of land and money increased, which gave white people more and more for their kids, grandkids, and so on. Today, this unequal balance of who has land, money, power, and rights still exists and affects people of color. It affects their ability to start their own business and donate their money to good causes. It affects the amount of money that is put into building schools and hiring great teachers. It affects their ability to speak their own languages and preserve their cultures. It affects their ability to tell their own stories or make their own TV shows and movies. It affects who has access to medicine and good doctors. It affects how they are treated by the police, government, and court system. All of these things are the result of systemic racism. And even though people of color have more equality today than they ever have, new forms of systemic racism are created all the time. We need to change the system and erase the racist ideas that live in our laws, schools, stories, and other institutions. We need to create ways for people of color who have been left behind for so long to catch up so that money, land, great schools, quality doctors, and basic rights are equally available to everyone. Systemic racism isn't new. It's just hard to see. But once you do, it's hard to ignore. So practicing systemic racism every day. In the schools you go to, movies you watch, neighborhood you live in. Point it out to your friends, point it out to your family. Because systemic racism can't be undone until we open our eyes and see it.